we talk about a lot about sort of capturing energy data, utility data, these kinds of things, ways to track it, measure it, store it. And I know that folks out there have, had experiences with different kinds of, what we might call like energy data management dashboards or platforms, that kind of thing. I think most of us have kind of gone through the Lucid sphere. I know there's the Energy Star program. I know like Johnson Controls and some others are kind of have or are developing their own. There's some that are more open, right? There's some that have costs. I wanted this to be a session and a space to have some discussion about the different types of platforms that are out there. If folks want to share their experiences with them, my thought, one goal that I could see coming out of this is there something where we all, or multiple campuses, maybe it's not everybody across the system, but are there multiple campuses that would want to explore a platform together, right? Sort of in the spirit of the VPPA. And maybe that means even reaching out to municipalities, to tech schools, et cetera, because I know I've had some connections from folks who are interested in that as well, right? In better data management, tracking, right? All of this stuff that we know we want and need metrics on. So I just thought would be a great time to kind of set some goals and have a conversation about this. So in the document, I just put some things at the top as just what I was kind of thinking about, like, do we want a shared system? I kind of heard, given the comment about, I think, Asset Works yesterday by Alex Rowe, maybe, that's easier said than done. And I don't know what sort of a financial lift that would be to get everybody or, multiple campuses on a similar system. If everybody kind of just wants to go their own way, maybe that just makes sense in the near term. But
hey, can I ask a question? Or I guess I just interrupted you, so I'll stop and you can finish before I interrupt you.
No, go ahead.
So I've been involved in a lot of projects that have energy dashboards, but the primary purpose of those energy dashboards is operational. How do we best tune our systems? How do we best keep an eye on them to make sure they're running efficiently or running as designed? And that doesn't always translate real well to just sort of public access, and not so much from the standpoint of the information isn't understandable, but does it actually cause people to change their behavior? Sometimes dashboards are tied, or I haven't experienced this. I've read articles and I've heard people talk about the idea of tying a dashboard to some sort of competitive situation where one building or one department competes against another for some measurement. I mean, information about that and whether we would have expectations and how that information would be used to actually affect change in behavior, I guess, to me, that's a question that we would want to address before we start talking about the technology associated with how you actually do it.
So yeah, and to Tony's point, I mean, I guess the question is, what type of information are we talking about? And when we say dashboard, what do we mean by dashboard? I think Alex Frank has a lot of information on this from our team. So I mean, Alex, if you could just share, some of the research that you have done, because the way I think about this at this type of level, really what we're doing is we're taking stars categories in those, and we're saying this is the amount of energy per square foot on this campus. If we're going to compare campus to campus. So is that what we're trying to do? And then when you dive in, like, I look at it as like you have the DOA situation where we're like the state of Wisconsin, here's as much energy as the state of Wisconsin is doing. You have a state agency in UW system, and here's all the universities that aggregate up to the state agency. And then each campus has their, campus-wide dashboard for the metrics that they want. So at that type of high level, that's just really like, what is a really good tool for reporting on this and keeping those things up to date. But at a campus level, we're going to still have to figure out how to get all this information from each building, from each metric. There's not just one system because there's all these different metrics that we're doing. But really what we're saying is at a high level, what are our campus impacts? And then from those high level campus impacts, we can say this is the UW system campus impacts. And then that all rolls up into the state for their reporting purposes. I mean, again, I could be totally off base here, but Alex, do you want to, talk with the work that you've done?
Sure. Travis is talking me up here though, so I hope I can live up to what you just said. So I actually really, Tony, appreciate your comments because that's where my head goes right away. It's kind of like, well, what's the kind of end goal of getting this data out there? Because then that cascades back into like how much effort you want to put into the data. I know, especially with the size of our campus, 400 some odd buildings, some meters collecting 15 seconds worth of data, or every 15 seconds, like there's a lot of data that you could provide, and there's a lot of effort that could go into how you work that. And I'll also echo Tony to say that operationally, we have some like internal dashboards. They're very plant specific right now, really focused on kind of plant operations that our energy utilities team utilizes to look at energy use on campus. They also look at like campus-wide kind of energy stuff, manage our demand, try to keep a handle on potential demand costs and stuff. And so there's very operational dashboard stuff like that that's not really going to get behavior change, is going to get like, how do we tune some of the big equipment to manage costs and not get surprised on stuff like that. But I think that's very different from the stuff that I'm thinking we're talking about here, which is a little bit more of how do we make some of both our impacts on campus, but also like our progress towards our goals more publicly available. So there's kind of two main things that I was thinking about in preparation for this discussion. The first is a little bit at what Travis was getting at, which is like outside of energy, let's just think about like all the different things, all the different goals we have, and how do we, as simply as possible, show our progress and be able to more, at least more frequently check in on how we're doing. And so we, and Travis has been my guinea pig on this, so I appreciate his support because I've been using waste data as he's got his arms around that a little bit better. I've been playing around with more visualization type tools. And so the tool that we've been using is something called High Charts, and I'll throw a link. In the chat. It's something that we have as part of our kind of web development tools. It builds off of WordPress tables, if anyone knows kind of website configuration, but it's pretty good at interactive visualizations. And you know what, I'll just share my screen here real quick. This is not, it's still a little messy, so forgive me. But you have charts where you can get monthly data and you can zoom in and you can move around, and they're pretty easy to set up. There's even like a table that you could filter on, and it filters the data above it. You kind of tie tables to graphs. So it's semi-interactive. The thing that we've liked about this thus far is this actually is built off of a Google Sheet. So there's nothing super fancy in the background. And in a perfect world, Travis will own to just updating his waste data in that Google Sheet, and then our graphs will kind of update behind that. So it's a pretty simple thing. Now, this is really good for data at this kind of scale, monthly type data that you can, without too much of a burden, manually put in someplace. That's not necessarily going to work, perhaps, when you're talking about, if you want to do building level energy data at anything kind of beyond that scale. So the only other thing that, a last point I'll throw out there, then I will stop talking, is while we have talked a lot about energy dashboards. We have not made much progress in that space. The little bit that we have done is I've been leveraging some of the work that our green office team does, where they go out and talk with offices about how to be more sustainable. And especially during the pandemic, where there was less they could do in person, we said like, hey, if we had building level energy data, what would you use it for? How would you find that useful? And had some of our students engage with the office managers on that. And the two big takeaways from what we did, basically, we had about 3 offices that were interested. I manually pulled data, had worked with the students, and they kind of presented the results of here's how much energy your building is using over time. Here's what changed at the start of the pandemic, kind of just some things. And the 2 things that came out in terms of value of having that data, at least for kind of office managers, one is everyone wants to know how they compare to someone else, another building on campus or another office on campus. Are they good or bad? And they don't really know, and they don't have any insight to it. And I'm guessing that's similar to other schools, but no one has a sense of if their building's any good or bad when it comes to energy use, and if there's anything they should be concerned about it or in any sort of way. And the other thing is that where offices have been trying to advocate for efficiency programs or where they've done light replacements, they don't actually necessarily know if it's worked. The information doesn't get down to them. And they're like, well, did we actually save any energy? And then can I use that as fodder for getting more investment into my buildings? So those are the 2 uses of getting some data out there, is perhaps like how do you help people compare themselves to other buildings and kind of build some champions, and how do you kind of like learn from past projects again to advocate for more efficiency. So I hope that's helpful. I'll stop for now.
Well, you can think about it in a lot of different ways. And at the very sort of highest impact level, for example, our energy management team and our in facilities, Claire, they're controls experts, but they on their computer at all times is the total electrical demand for the campus. And at certain times of the year, it starts creeping up towards our sort of contractual maximum with our utility. And if it looks like it's going to go over that, they'll shut stuff off to make sure that we don't go over it. They'll turn chillers off, or they'll turn them down, or they'll change set point temperatures in order to manage that load. And that's valuable. I mean, that's valuable, but it's at an operational level as opposed to at a sort of public relations level. And, I'm supportive of providing as much information. The question that you talked about this, Alex, it's like, how much, investment in time and money do you want to make to provide some of this information if it's not actually going to change behavior or have an impact on energy usage or energy cost or whatever. I mean, that said, there's no question that there's value for people that need that information to manage the systems, but having a large screen display in the lobby of Centennial Hall at UW Eau Claire that people can glance at when they walk by to see, even if you're comparing your own building to previous years or previous days' performance. I mean, does that mean I'm going to, if it looks like our load is running high when I'm teaching class today, does that mean I'm going to leave the lights off in my classroom? Maybe, I don't know. I mean, those are the kind of things that I wonder about as when we talk about energy dashboards. One of the other things, and I was just reading an article about this as we were getting ready to talk today here, but we had a group of students that had that spent a lot of time and was funded through student seg fees to put together an energy dashboard, but it required a lot of data sharing between our building campus automation, campus management system, and the front end that they wanted to build for it. And they had no idea what the data meant. They didn't have a good comprehension. And it sounds like, at least from the recent information that I can find out there, that there are a lot of startup companies that think that they can build dashboards that would be somehow meaningful or impactful. And yet if they don't understand the data, they're going to probably fail at that. So, but I think that's part of the problem, is that the people that understand the data aren't thinking about the information the same way we would as, you know, presenting it to a bunch of building occupants. So.
Kate.
Yeah, just kind of from experience and kind of summary here. So you can do reporting for your operations staff to be able to make changes on the fly or within a relative amount of time. You can report data to see trends over time that you can probably have a better chance of reacting to on a larger scale, or that, you know, you want to show the CBO. And then you have the public facing use of data. Those are like the three buckets that I see, and you guys have already kind of touched on that. So let me just reflect on that for a second. So in the operations side, I will say that's the most effective if you have a team that has time to react, because we do not have a team that can react to every alarm in Madison, or jump at, you know, Tony, it sounds amazing that your team can actually like do something with the data in real time. That's awesome. The trending over time, there's a lot of options. Like your spreadsheets are doing that right now, and that's useful in both directions. That's useful to the public and it's useful to operations, because we tend to be in operations that reacts to data over time. The public facing, I just want to say, a big reality of energy uses is it's not people. You need to turn the lights on whether there's 10 people in a classroom or whether there's 30 people in a classroom. That's definitely a rule of thumb for how COVID affected us. And your plug load at best is 25% of your load. So if you get people to reduce 5, 10, 15, 20%, that's still a small amount of the larger piece. The equipment that you're running, your drives, all that kind of stuff is really where your electric uses. So public facing really needs to be incorporated into education and so forth. And when we had the Lucid dashboard, we did see drops and competitions were fruitful, but it faded over time, as did Lucid. Lucid became a very, they made themselves non-essential. They had a really good platform that they tanked when they lost Java, underscoring it. And we had Lucid for a long time. So I have lots of thoughts about that. But I just sort of wanted to like break it down into those three things and really get, if people know why they want the data, then you'll know what kind of platform you might all want to share. And Alex, I am kind of curious about the WordPress thing, because we use WordPress. And so that was sort of intriguing right there, but I'll stop.
Others?
I'll share something really quick. Zen and Small Eric from UW Stout. In terms of the public facing dashboard, we still have our Lucid dashboard. And sometimes when we go in, let's say to a housing building and retrofit all of the LED, we'll take all the fluorescents and do an LED retrofit, and all of the corridors and public spaces, or let's say even all of the lighting. And you don't see that savings like you should after it's all done. And so, we just spent $150,000 and we are not seeing that reduction in energy because of issues like what Tony was talking about, the calculations that how we give them the data out of our BAS, exactly how are they extrapolating that to actuals. So I worry when we have that public facing dashboard that the data might not be right, and there's so many other factors with energy use that you might not see the energy savings that you were really hoping for, because any myriad of other issues, it being a dorm, and maybe they use their, coffee makers more or something, who knows, year to year. But definitely operationally, we use ours, not on a daily basis, but we do look at trends.
Abrina?
Yes, thank you. Just to add, from the Stout perspective, one thing I think we enjoy about our dashboard is that we are able to add our solar panels to that dashboard. So students, faculty, staff, the public can actually see how much energy those solar panels are producing. I think there is a big challenge for, why we have the public facing dashboard. Is it really creating change? Obviously, competitions can be a fun short-term thing. But in the long run, asking people to turn off lights and be conscious of their energy use, it's beneficial, but I kind of struggle with the concept of, on campus, we have equipment systems that are maybe out to date, not running efficiently, and those things aren't addressed, but we're asking people not to bring in a space heater because their building is freezing in the winter. So I think that's probably a challenge, but all in all, the thing I think was most beneficial is just having the information out there, and the solar panels aspect.
Yeah, Brad, I'll piggyback on that and echo what a lot of folks have said. I think the other thing that's needs to be really closely considered is just your staffing, the labor that it takes to enter that information. Even if it's just on a monthly basis, and you have to have someone, if you can do some upfront work that can help, and then you could have perhaps a student who's entering in the data, that that'll lessen the cost, but there's still definitely a time associated with that. And then I know one of the things, we had sort of like an energy benchmarking group for a while that we were looking at different options, and as has been mentioned, Amy developed a really neat sort of integration of Power BI with her energy information that was sort of forward facing, but also that requires like UIT or like an IT support, and there's a good, that's a key piece of it too. So yeah, it's definitely fascinating. I think from managing our resources on a macro scale, if we have eyes on it, that's always good. If we can gather the data as efficiently as possible, so it actually is pretty easy to get, then I think that's one of the big hurdles to overcome. Especially because a lot of folks won't even have utilities that are giving them data digitally. Like they might still be getting data on monthly bills, like in paper form. I know some of the water utilities around the state are still like that. And that's something that Megan Levy and the State Energy Office has been trying to figure out.
Dave.
So just a couple of things to say here. This is definitely not my area of expertise when it comes to this sort of data collection, but there is a couple of things that I at least want to put out there that I think are worth considering in this conversation. That from a point of dashboards, I think one of the things that I would like to see addressed in some way is getting us all to the same level of minutia about what data we can actually collect. I know like certain facilities don't have sub-meterings on all of their buildings. And so then it makes it really hard to identify like, well, how much of a cow is this actual building comparatively to others? Because we don't set a scale of which we have sort of agreed upon measurement. So from that perspective, I think that would be something going forward in this conversation that we should identify, because otherwise it makes it harder, I think, to have a real fair comparison of apples to apples, not only on our campuses, but across the system as a whole. So just thinking about that. And then, you know, I said when we opened, I would be, you know, looking at this conversation, I would definitely advocate that we try, if we were to go forward or continue to talk about this, like I am definitely pro standardization in terms of finding one energy dashboard that could be used across many of our campuses, because I think that allows us to harness the expertise of our system better. Because there are going to be people who are going to be really well versed in this and have a lot of knowledge on it. And then there are going to be people like myself who are less versed on it and less knowledgeable. And so if I'm working in a system that's the same as Tony's or Alex's, and I have a question, I know there are resources and people I can reach out to call off of my own campus that I could say like, hey, can you tell me what's going on here? Or how do you interpret this? And having that be standardized, I think would be really beneficial. Just because then I do think it allows us to take better use of the expertise that our system has. So just 2 comments on this topic.
Thanks, Dave.
So Dave, I just had a quick comment on that one. I think the only way that's going to happen is if there is, you know, if we're doing annual reports, I feel like that should be in our part of our annual report task, that we upload this information somewhere. So I agree with you in that, the sense of like, in an ideal world, like we propose with other software solutions, it would make a lot more sense if we were all using the same tools, right? But at the way that I'm looking at, to like simplify it, is like, if we wanted to do that level of information of, you know, from the state to the UW system, at the UW system level, we should be reporting energy usage, like total energy usage, and then energy usage per square foot. Like that's all the metrics that I would per year. You know, something like that. And then for waste, it would be, you know, total waste, you know, total water usage, whatever those metrics are, but make it really simple, like simplify it as much as possible, because that could then be part of our reporting, and to see how, and then how is each campus doing each year. I mean, if that's what we want that comparison to be, rather than all working on the same software, just like we're adding these not a lot of data to this on an annual basis.
Yeah. And I hear what you're saying, and I think that's a good question. I think more broadly about like, well, what is the goal and purpose of this conversation? Like, where are we trying to get to with it? Because I don't entirely know personally.
Yep. Yeah, one last thing, and I'll be quiet. But I think the one part that we're missing here is the academic side of things. So what I like to do as a person who previously taught a course on campus sustainability, I want to be able to have if we're going to do the teaching as our living learning laboratory teaching, we have to give that information to the courses so that they can utilize that data for their teachings. So that's where I think there's a lot of value in research projects and all of that too.
Stacy?
Hi, Stacey Reese. I'm the Sustainability Program Coordinator for the City of Madison. And I thank you for allowing me to be a fly in the wall on this conversation, because I'm having a lot of these conversations amongst municipalities here in Dane County, statewide, and City of Madison has done its own energy benchmarking and dashboard work. So I'll do a quick little share totally open to answering any questions, but then I'll just be quiet so you guys can continue your exploration here. But so City of Madison, we've been tracking our meters for the last decade or so, and just some of the various platforms we've used, explored, is Energy Star Portfolio Manager, Energy Stewards. We have just recently dabbled a little bit in the U.S. Green Building Council's ARC platform. But the link I shared in the chat is what we are focusing on, which is called Energy Cap. And I'll admit it's a little unique to city because we have a lot of meters that are tied to non-square footage. So if you think about traffic lights, pumping stations, wells, and sewer lift stations. So that being said, it does have a dashboard functionality. And how that came about is that we actually had climate activist groups demand it. And we may or may not have, as a city, said in whether planning documents or other adopted resolutions that we were going to do it. We just never did. And then it was on us to like figure out the dashboard. And we did actually engage with a few consulting firms that did give us quotes on doing these dashboard platforms. There's a lot of those startups out there. But then we figured out that the program we had already been using, Energy Cap, had this dashboard functionality. So it was really nice. And it just so happened that our engineering website was being updated. So it's just a landing page with a picture, and then there's a link, and then it takes you to the Energy Cap dashboard that I linked in the chat. As far as like reporting out and the data, it's monthly data, it's monthly utility data. We do actually have a consultant. So in addition to paying for Energy Cap, we do have a consultant on contract that actually does the data upload. And I just want to hearken how important it is to figure out that data piece of it. As I speak to other municipalities, they like cross their fingers for a summer intern to like upload 12 months of data, and then they sit there for 12 months waiting for that next summer intern to come back around. It's really challenging. We're trying to have those larger advocacy conversations about utilities, and are there APIs out there? Come on, people, get up to the modern century here and automatically uploading that data. So we pay for it, but it helps us because we don't have staff time to do that. And they correct things when bills come in that are incorrect because we just have so many to manage here at the city. So, and then as far as looking at the data, I mean, we've gone through a couple challenges, like we did the Georgetown University Energy Prize, we did a Green Madison push, and those you can see, like when I got my login to Energy Cap, you can see those cool reports, but we stopped operationalizing that after the challenge was over. Only recently has Energy Cap introduced automated reports, which I was like, thank you, somebody help. So now we have these automated reports we just started doing within the last few months, where they shoot out to say our fleet building to our fleet superintendent, or all the police facilities to our police district, and whether or not they open those up and actually look at them, it remains to be seen. But that's, like I said, a recent development. But that's challenging too. But what I echoed here to say is, we're spending capital dollars to do energy retrofits, but it's the operating side that is paying the bills, right? And those are two separate budgets for the city. So, we're investing these dollars into these LED retrofits, and then the police department's paying those bills. And so is that cost savings? We have a gut intuition about those cost savings, but to see it in practice, we still have to kind of dive back into the data to see if that's real or not. And then we did have a conversation to make that dashboard public. We are a public entity, we are subject to the Freedom of Information Act, so like we have to give out that data, but it was really the climate activists that pushed us to have that data. We did have a conversation internally about incorrect data. Like they're going to look at, we just basically stood up a bunch of homeless shelters in city, basically warehouses. They're using a ton of energy, right? And that on paper, that looks terrible. But in reality, that was the best thing we could do. But somebody from the outside is not going to know the story behind it. So like in a dream world, I would have like little story tidbits or a story map or something, but like, I'll wait for that summer intern in 2022. So that's all I'm going to share, and I'm totally open to answering any questions.
Tony? Thank you, Stacy. I appreciate that.
Yeah, that was very interesting. And it kind of goes a little bit to what I was going to talk about. And actually I thought of it when Travis was talking about, aggregating data or summarizing data at a total energy measurement, and an energy per square foot. On our campus, we decided to do an EUI calculation, a historical EUI calculation for each building based on the best data that we have, which we have good electrical energy usage data. The data that we have for heating energy and cooling energy at a building level is a little less reliable. The cooling energy is good because it's BTU meters, but the heating energy is an estimate based on gallons of condensate that get returned to the heating plant. But that said, again, so you have a variety of buildings with a variety of uses. A lab science building is going to be different than a classroom office building by a long shot. And a building that was built in 2015 is going to likely be pretty different from a building that was built in 1955. And so again, the question gets to be, how do you use that information, even if you're 100% certain that it's reliable, good data? Do you say, well, we should tear down this building that was built in 1955 because it's, uses twice as much energy per square foot as one that was built in 2015? Maybe. Or do you say, well, instead of tearing that building down because there's other reasons to keep it, we should invest, whatever, $30 million or 30 or 40 or $50 a square foot in that building, or maybe more, maybe $300 a square foot, to do a deep energy retrofit of that building so it can, function more appropriately. And I'm interested when I have the opportunity to see data on a building by building or even campus to campus, institution to institution level, how different facilities compare and how do they compare to some standard, which is a whole nother conversation altogether. Like, whose standard do you use? The Department of Energy has they have a chart that says it is median EUIs for a bunch of different building types for the entire country. Obviously, you got climate differences. Some places are heating dominant, some places are cooling dominant, but in a large picture, that Department of Energy data should be relatively valid. And yet, I got engineering teams telling me that it's not valid. Based on their experience, buildings use more energy than what the Department of Energy says they should use or do use. So, it just goes back to, I like the idea of having the energy information, having information in a dashboard form that says, this is how this campus performs, this is how this building performs. Trying to do an apples to apples comparison from one building to another or one campus to another is a slippery minefield that could get you into trouble if you start making decisions based on just those numbers.
I totally agree.
Like Stacy was saying, there's definitely a story that's associated with each data point or each building information point. And without that story, bad decisions could get made, right?
On that same note, having been kind of around the block on the different types of dashboards and energy and the way John, of course, is the one who organizes it in our office, I'm interested in the data I can make the most use of is to compare us to yesterday. UWM has a very large, extensive art school. that's actually one of our biggest energy users. We obviously have a large STEM quadrant on campus. They're mostly Sputnik era buildings, and that's going through a phase change. So when I'm really honestly using data in the Office of Sustainability is to compare UWM to UWM yesterday. And we know that we don't fit well into Energy Star. I just saw that link, Alex, you posted. I didn't open it though. And I don't mean to damper this conversation because obviously it's kind of cool to see how you compare, but those stories of why we are where we're at, there's so much in the data, and there's so many errors potentially in the data. So to me, that is the most useful day-to-day, month-to-month, year-to-year use of data is to compare to yourself.
Well, thanks, folks. I mean, I appreciate this feedback. I guess to go back to Dave's point earlier, you know, I don't know that I necessarily had a specific goal with this other than to just start a conversation, to hear what folks are thinking, where you're at, things you've used. You know, I think a lot of this comes from just my own, where I'm at with it, like using getting access to information. I mean, it sounds like by and large, these systems are not automated. So when you rely on manual input of data, if there's a system out there that does draw, you know, automatically, I think that would be great.
I mean, there are dashboard systems that are completely automated that require no manual intervention, but they're expensive. I mean, they're expensive. They require, you know, very detailed, specific IT type platforms. They take a huge amount of investment. They take a fair amount of maintenance because there are, you know, sensors that need to be maintained and calibrated. There are, you know, things that can go wrong. But there are some, you know, very robust automated platforms that allow you to do that. It's just that it's a big investment.
Sure. And to go to a point, I mean, one of the other, you know, an impetus that sort of spurred this conversation for me is, you know, we have looked at using the OED platform that I think was developed at Beloit College. We've been trying to do this for years. I mean, we have had faculty, right, sort of to Alex and I think others' points, like living learning lab opportunities. Can we use the data in our academic mission? You know, so like I hear the comments, concerns about, right, like how are the data used, to what level are they sort of publicly available versus, you know, operationally used versus sort of other internal uses, how much, you know, sort of availability is there, you know, for folks to access that information, right? Are we wanting to be transparent? Does that lead to behavior change? Does it really not? I guess these are all still questions I have, and I'm just trying to get a conversation going about, if folks have a direction, you know, can some of us get on board, right? Like, can we get in the caboose? Wes?
Yeah, I'll at least try to answer the questions just to kind of give a snapshot of where Whitewater's at. We have used Excel spreadsheets in the past, and that's pretty much it. And my job is basically looking for errors in manual meter reads and then moving it into a compiled spreadsheet of all of our utilities. So that's been the main way we've been managing data for the last decade. I dropped a link to GEM. This is what we're implementing now. I had worked for about a decade to try to get some kind of platform with public facing visibility, and the pushback generally was that we don't want to do just a public facing dashboard. It needs to have backend functionality for us to make decisions on the facility side. And that was really the primary driver. The other factors for us, at least, is that our IT department won't let you plug in anything to the network without getting extensive approvals. So anything that would even be a one-way packet send, from the Lucid server out, that was a non-starter. They're really concerned about security as far as those, even the one-way communication tools. So basically, and then our control specialists had no interest in slapping on any third-party applications to Metasys. So we kind of got stuck in this boat of waiting for Johnson Controls to do something better. And we're operating off of a legacy version of Metasys. This thing has, been here longer than me, probably by about 10 years. So we were waiting for something to come along. And every time Johnson Controls talked to us, it was always like, oh, we have this new product and we haven't really tested it yet, but we want to try it with you, but give us tens of thousands of dollars to be our guinea pig. And eventually just, we kept kicking the can until it got to the point where we're looking at trying to automate the way we charge back utilities to auxiliaries. And GEM seemed to be a little bit further along in the development process. And because it's the only option that our control specialist will consider, because he's afraid of the gremlins in the system, that's pretty much where we're at. So that's going to at least automate the meter polls for me. And then I've been dumping our historical data into Energy Star Portfolio Manager just as a inexpensive, as in free visualization tool, something to kind of aggregate data in a better way, and then make that shareable in some form. And a lot of that stuff students have done. But I know there's some disadvantages. I know some of you have looked at Portfolio Manager. We've talked about this as a system solution in the past. And I think there's some limitations to it. So, pros and cons, usually the cons always come down to cost and interconnection. And then, pros is like as cheap as possible or whatever I can get people to agree with. That's ultimately the decision making. I've been pretty much on the outside. So yeah, I think there's, Energy Star Portfolio Manager is good because it's accessible to everyone. It's got some data import tools and things like that. But, I know Madison did a study on it, so they could probably speak to kind of the limitations for their purposes. And, I think that's all the further we've really gotten as far as a unified platform that we would be dumping data into. I should just call Alex out again. That was fun. I think actually Jake sent me that report.
Yeah, so we worked with a group of graduate students in the energy analysis and policy capstone course last spring semester, and they were testing the Energy Star Portfolio Manager software for us to see if it was a feasible option for us in looking at our building energy use. The problem with the software, though, that it wasn't quite nuanced enough to really dial down into like what a college campus tracks and the different uses of different spaces on a college campus. I mean, you'll have one building that one floor is offices, one floor is a lab, one floor is, janitorial, one floor is just open attic space. And you can't compare that building with, 4, 5, 6 different floors to a, just an academic only building, even though they might have, similar attributes. So it was useful as far as ruling out what we don't want and what we need more of, which is more detail and being able to analyze on like a smaller scale. But I'm happy to share that final report with anyone that's interested.
Yeah, and that's kind of what led me to think that this would be more or less a better aggregation tool for our historical data rather than being an analytical tool, better, more accessible than a spreadsheet. Basically, when I get requests for data and things like that, I can provide macro level monthly meter reads for our buildings, and it's only going to have a certain amount of usefulness. And then the other thing I wanted to kind of ask about, seeing that Madison, City of Madison is using Energy Cap. I think John and I are harassed by the Energy Cap guy at least like 6 times a year, including recently, and I think we kicked the can down the road on that. Energy Cap's big selling point is always that they're going to save you money by checking your utility bills. Has that turned into real savings from what you've seen on the city level?
That's interesting. The Energy Cap relationships are like a decade ago, so I'm not really sure how that all came to be. But from my understanding, if we have contacts with Energy Cap, it's usually like something's broken on their end. but we work with our consultant actually to do a lot of the checks and the making sure things are going, because they have to take our utility data and mess with it, right? Because the utility data is not as I pointed out, they're not a green button standardization, and we have Alliant, we've got MG&E, right? So they're all different. So the consultants is the one that actually looks for things that are like red flags or something like that. And like I said, and that's another thing, the energy analysis, just we couldn't make it operationalized to look for. I mean, we now have a little bit more of a better sense of like looking for laggards, looking for big energy hogs, and trying to build out sort of a 5 to 10 year plan around that. But Energy Cap wasn't, as far as I know, part of those conversations or anything like that. Maybe that's a new product line they offer since we started our relationship.
Yeah, I don't know, John can maybe help me a little bit with this because we've met with this guy a few times, but or somebody from Energy Cap. It always comes down to this utility bill analysis where they kind of look at rates, right? They look at kind of where the tariffs are and things like that. And you know, all of our energy comes in through a central switchgear. Like 98% of our energy comes in one meter. You know, so that's the kind of thing where if we had multiple campuses set up like that, where there's these primary feed points that most of the utility bills are coming through, then that would maybe be the system level analysis. If there's savings to be had, you know, and all of us are able to feed our main meters into the Energy Cap software, then there might be savings across the board rather than just for one campus. And I think that's why it's always kind of on our radar, right, John? But it's never, I don't know. I haven't really, I don't believe the hype, I guess, at this point, because it's hard to know exactly how that's supposed to work.
Yeah, it's interesting. We've talked, Milwaukee County uses Energy Cap, and they have not seen bill savings. But partly that might be due to they have like an insane amount of really tiny accounts. Whereas we have some, you know, really huge accounts and not so many of them. So to Stacy's, to your point, we could, yeah, if it was looking at, you know, outliers in data, whether that's, you know, demand or just cost or whatever, to red flag that, that would be really useful for us. I mean, I do that every once in a while if I see something on a bill that's really weird, and yeah, it happens. I mean, we would probably save, you know, 10, 20, 30 grand a year just on erroneous bills. But it'd be interesting to see, like you said, Wes, at a statewide level, if that was even possible. And I think we've mostly diverted Energy Cap to talk to like Megan Levy at the PSC and Maria to say this might be more of a statewide initiative, and specifically because some of the things in the clean energy report that's going to come out, or in the climate change task force recommendations, there were some recommendations that sort of dovetailed with this.
I appreciate all of the information being shared and all of the, oh wow, UW Stout position went live today. I appreciate all of the information being shared. We've got about 5 minutes left before we close the meeting for the year and for the day. Do folks have ideas about next steps on this front? Is there a next step? Does this move into an energy work group as a potential topic or goal? Are other folks interested in continuing this conversation? Are we so different that it makes sense for us to each carve our own path?
I'm happy to move it into the energy work group, and it even if it doesn't end up being a common platform discussion, I think there's value in talking about information and what's valuable information, who can benefit from it? How can we collectively benefit from it? And I don't think it's, I mean, I think it's definitely worth having further conversations about it.
I agree. I think at the very least, information sharing, best practice sharing, understanding where people have success and challenges, something we do very well in this group, but continue and maybe having a space to do that. The one other thing that's potential next step is just keeping an eye on that state level energy report and how there might be ways that, you know, if it's being reported at the state level, how are we involved in that? And how do we support that? Whether that's a dashboard or otherwise, it's still the same idea of how do we take in energy data and presenting it that way. So
I mean, speaking
continuing
of that report, it's kind of it's kind of a dashboard kind of report.
Mhm.
I was curious if any of you have looked at that. And I know, Kate, you mentioned before that you found some accuracy issues with it, but I'm just wondering if any of the other campuses have looked at that in detail to see what you think about the accuracy of the data. And whether it's worth having more discussions about that, because I mean, to me, that's the kind of dashboard information that would be great to be able to view online and maybe have a little bit more navigation capability to look at different things or compare different things. But, you know, I like the report. I like the concept. I'm a little suspect about the accuracy.
I've used it before for looking at historical data, but I think as others have mentioned, and even when I've like talked with our facilities director, she's like, I don't know that the numbers on there are always exactly correct, you know, or there are some disparities that, you know, may or may not be worth noting.
I'll just I guess echo the sentiment that best practice sharing, just getting all the links that we got today about where everyone's at. You know, taking a little time to harvest information from those of us who have more time to kind of deep dive on topics like this, like Alex, where you can look into these dashboards and have some familiarity and some of these new platforms that are going on and what other people are doing. That's super helpful to me. Because I just don't ever have the time to dig into this topic in a lot of detail. So, but it's increasingly relevant for my job security, ultimately, to know what I'm talking about as far as energy goes. So I need to be able to speak this language and kind of stay ahead of the curve as far as energy management on campus.
Any final comments? Well, I appreciate everybody sticking it out through this kind of last hour session and offering up information. I definitely took a lot away from it, and yeah, I appreciate all of the links being shared. Lots of things to explore, you know, when we have the time.